Hello everyone, welcome to Chapter 3, Video 1. This video corresponds to Section 3.1 in your textbook. Chapter 3 is all about cells. We're going to learn about what organelles we find in cells and how those organelles do jobs that specialize the cells and keep our bodies functioning properly. Specifically in section 3.1, we're going to be talking about cell theory, several different shapes of cells, looking at the various sizes of cells, talking about how developments in microscopes allowed us to see cells more clearly, and then very briefly the major components of the cell, which we'll be talking about in much more detail in later videos of chapter 3. So first, cytology is the study of cells. It started way back with Robert Hooke. I think you guys will remember him from an earlier video. He was looking at corks and saw cell walls and gave cells their name. Then Schwann was a German scientist, and one of his big contributions was the idea that all animals and all plants are made of cells. Louis Pasteur did some really elegant experiments that proved that living things can't just appear on their own. If you guys are curious about those experiments, I strongly recommend you look them up. They're super interesting. He did some really groundbreaking work and proved things in ways that nobody could dispute. So one of his big findings, he had several, but one of his big findings was living things just can't show up out of nowhere. They have to come from a previously existing living thing. So cell theory has 5 tenets. This is really, really important. This is central to all of biology, all of anatomy and physiology. Fully expect to see this on your exams. Super important slide right here. So cell theory states that all living things are made of cells and cell products. When I say cell products, I mean proteins or lipids or other macromolecules that the cells made. Cell theory states that the cell is the simplest structure. It's the functional unit of life. Cell theory relates structure to function, meaning things have a structure that allows them to do their job efficiently and to do it with a high level of specificity. The fourth one, cells can't just show up out of nowhere. All cells come from an earlier cell. All cells are descended from cells. And within a species, all the cells have some biochemical similarities. Even if cells from tissue to tissue or organ to organ are highly specialized, the biochemical processes that those cells do will be similar. So now we're going to look at 9 of the different cell types. In the human body, we have over 200 highly specialized different cell types that can be found in all of our organs and tissues. Some of these cell types are very distinct. Some of them are a bit similar, and it can be hard to differentiate between them. These ones are fairly easy to differentiate, though. So we have squamous cells. These tend to be square in shape. Cuboidal cells have a 3-dimensional structure. They're kind of similar to squamous, except they're taller. Even taller, but also retaining something of a square shape, is the columnar cells. Polygonal cells have 5 or 6 sides, and you can kind of see distinct angles to them. Stellate cells, these are going to be often seen in nerve cells, dendrites, axons, are parts of these cells that reach out. Spheroidal cells are sphere-shaped. They look kind of like a globe. Discoid cells, these are things like red blood cells. They have a disc shape. Fusiform are long and narrow and tapered at the ends. And then fibrous are going to be kind of very long and narrow and more cylinder shaped without the tapering that we see in the fusiform cells. Most cells in the human body are about 10 to 15 micrometers in length. The largest single cell in the human body is the egg. It's 100 micrometers in length, so you guys can see it's sometimes 10 times the size of a regular cell. Nerve cells can grow to be over a meter long. Okay, so your sciatic nerve that goes from the lower back to all the way to your foot, that's just one cell. It's very, very narrow in places, but it's very long. The thing that limits cell size in general is the relationship between the diameter and the volume. Okay, so as the cell gets bigger, its volume increases more than its surface area. And if a cell gets too big, there isn't enough surface area for the cell to do all the communication and intake and output functions that the cell does. So that's why cells tend to stay pretty small. And here's a mathematical representation of that you guys can read through. When cells were first discovered and we were using more simple microscopes, we were looking at cells that looked like this, and we could see that the cells had a barrier between the inside of the cell and the outside of the cell, and it also had some darker spaces in the middle. Those were called nuclei or nucleus. Nuclei is the plural of nucleus from the beginning, and that's really all we could see. It was kind of assumed that the inside of the cell was just like fluid or gelatinous something. We had no idea what was in there, and we kind of assumed it wasn't very important. With the development of the transmission electron microscope, we could see that there were all sorts of interesting things inside the cell, and this made scientists very curious about what those things were and what they did, and as they investigated more, they discovered even more inside the cell, and that leads us to our current field of cell and molecular biology, which is what I do, and is constantly growing, constantly changing, and evolving. And finally, cells have some very basic general parts. We have lots of very specialized cells, but things that nearly all cells, maybe even absolutely all cells, have in common are a plasma membrane, sometimes called a cell membrane, and this separates the inside of the cell from the outside. It's made of mostly phospholipids with proteins interspersed in between. On the inside of the cell is something called cytoplasm. Cytoplasm is the fluid in which all the organelles, the cytoskeleton, and any foreign particles are found. And that cytoplasm, the fluid that all those things are in, is called the cytosol. And finally, there is fluid outside of cells. Okay, and this is called interstitial fluid. So that was a very quick introduction to cell theory and the very basic parts of a cell that are common to all cell types. This is a picture of the representative cell. When I say representative cell, what I mean is that not all cells like this, not all cells look like this, and in fact, it would be hard to find a cell that shows all of these different organelles this clearly or in these exact numbers or with this exact arrangement. But this representative cell kind of shows us all the things that could be there and if they all were there, how they could typically be arranged.